We appreciate all of the guests who have appeared on our show and sincerely thank them for providing you, our audience, with useful information. However, the advice our guests provide is theirs, and we encourage you to seek out a professional if you have specific questions about any topic we cover on the Crushing Debt Podcast. On this week's episode of the Crushing Debt Podcast, Constructing Success with Jason Avery.
Welcome to the Crushing Debt Podcast with your host, Florida attorney Sean Yesner, where our goal is to help you get rid of the financial bullies in your life.
So welcome back to this week's episode of the Crushing Debt Podcast. My name is Sean Yesner, owner and founder of Yesner Law, and this is a short intro, and I'm by myself. Your financial coach, George Curbelo, is off doing his thing, but we've got a couple of other things coming up in the near future. We've got some episodes coming up for you, but in the meantime, I wanted to rebroadcast one of my very first original episodes. And so this episode you're about to hear goes all the way back to episode 7. It was my interview of Jason Avery, who owns Avery Construction, but also owns a company called Constructing Success. And Jason's been invaluable in helping me create some systems here at the law firm to help me track and measure a lot of the things that go on here at the law firm. And a lot of that foundation was from his Constructing Success book, which I'll link here in the notes. So I hope you enjoy this classic episode of the Crushing Debt Podcast. I will mention very quickly our sponsors, Mark Purvis of LegacySpotlight.com, Sam Cohen of AttorneysFirst.com, but I hope you enjoy this classic episode. So welcome back to another episode of the Yesner Law Podcast. My name is Sean Yesner, and I am happy to have with me again Mr. Jason Avery, the president and CEO of Avery Construction, and a number one best-selling author. So welcome back, Jason.
Thanks for having me, Sean.
What I wanted to talk about today was on the construction side and on the legal side of construction. I get a lot of people who call me with permit issues. So just as a basic overview, a general overview, what basically is a permit and when might one be required? I know you can't cover every single time, but just generally.
Well, in general, a permit will be involved on any project larger than $1,500. A permit will be involved on any project that requires a specialty state license, and a permit should be required anytime that you're relocating plumbing, electric, air conditioning. If you are building structures that are load-bearing or that are within the wind zone, things that could potentially blow away from your house and smash into the neighbor's house instead, and things that could potentially create hazards for insurance companies are generally a good indication that a permit would be required. It's mainly that we need a third party from your county or city municipality to come by and verify that the work was performed within the stipulations of the Florida Building Code, which are greatly influenced by the insurance companies who have lobbyists that sit in on the writing of the code.
So my initial thought was that a lot of this is based on safety and based on making sure things are built properly.
Correct. You don't want electric that was done poorly that's going to burn your home down. You don't want plumbing that was done poorly that's going to flood the home. You don't want the home to blow away.
Right. So just today, coincidentally, I received an email from a prospect who had had a tenant in the house, and the tenant had built an enclosure over the back patio. I think either enclosed it or put up a screen or something like that. And unbeknownst to the owner, the county came out and said, sorry, that wasn't permitted. It should have been, and it wasn't permitted. And that created a lien. That created a lien not only against that property, but it created a lien against all the other properties that this particular owner owned. And so the prospect is now asking me to help them remove the lien so that they can sell it totally separate, different piece of property. And so you and I were talking about, well, how do we fix that permit issue? And there's only one of two ways, right?
Yeah, pretty much you either have to have an architect or engineer come out, review all the work that was done, and then write a letter to certify that all the work was performed within the stipulations of the Florida Building Code. In essence, the architect or engineer is now taking responsibility for that project and removing the responsibility from the local building department. Or you have to knock that building down and start all over again. Or
in this case, just knock down the one enclosure,
removing the problem area to begin with. Right, yes, should satisfy the county, and therefore remove the lien.
And I know that all the contracts in Florida, at least the standard contracts in Florida, now all have clauses in them that allow buyers to do permit searches. And I know that that's something that we get into on the title end, in terms of the title company can contact the county, contact the municipality, and do the permit search to find out if this stuff exists. And then if there are permits that haven't been closed, how do we deal with those?
Well, it happened just the other day that we were contracted to begin a renovation in a master bathroom. And as we applied for a permit, we were denied that permit because a prior air conditioning contractor and a prior roofer had both opened permits that were never properly closed out. They never had their final inspections. So we actually had to track down both of the prior contractors. They had to then get an engineer or architect to write them a letter certifying that their work had been performed within the code of that time. And those letters had to be submitted to the building department and reviewed and accepted before we were then able to see them closed, so that we could then reapply for our initially intended bathroom permit.
Okay. Want to turn our focus a little bit from permitting issues to other due diligence issues when someone is buying a house. And I know you and I discussed if someone's buying a waterfront property, that carries some special considerations.
Yeah, well, often people buy the home on the water specifically for the view. And then it's their intention that they're going to come in and they're going to gut the home and renovate it and start all over again with all brand new products. What they might not be considering is the involvement of FEMA. Anytime that you are in a flood zone, they actually have a rule called the 50-50 rule. And that caps you to your amount of total improvements. You're not allowed to improve more than 50% of the value of the structure. So even though this might be a $500,000 piece of real estate that you've purchased, maybe $400,000 of that is the value of the land, and only $100,000 of that is the value of the structure. So you might be capped to only $50,000 in improvements to that structure. Well, that can do a nice kitchen or some flooring or maybe a few bathrooms, but it's certainly not going to renovate the entire house. So that's an oversight that most people don't realize, and the only way around that rule would be to completely take the roof off of the structure and only use the footprint of the original building, and now you're basically in a new construction position to build up and start over again.
Yeah, I was going to say, it doesn't sound like if somebody wanted to build that house just to knock it down and rebuild the house, it doesn't sound like they could do that.
Well, they could knock it down and rebuild the house as long as they're raising it out of the flood elevation. But they're not going to be able to renovate the existing structure, which is the impression that most people have when they make that purchase.
Okay. Any other due diligence issues in terms of either a new homeowner or an investor who wants to buy a house, and they're looking at this house and evaluating, is this the right house for me? Any other due diligence issues from a construction or permitting perspective?
Certainly, just you can pull through the property appraiser's website, you can pull up the records of the home, and they will show you any permits that have ever been pulled on that building. So simply based on age of the property, if you know that the air conditioner has been replaced or that the roof has been replaced and you don't see record of that permit, that should raise a red flag. I would definitely recommend hiring a home inspector and who can red flag other items that could be wrong with the home. And definitely, you need to make sure you're dealing with a good title company who can do those other searches for you as well.
Well, I want to thank you again for being on the podcast. I do want to give you an opportunity. I know I said at the beginning, #1 best-selling author. The book is called Constructing Success, Blueprints for a Referral-Based Business. If anyone's interested in buying the book, where can they get it?
Amazon.com has it available in both a soft cover or a Kindle download. Just search for the title Constructing Success and it'll pull right up. We also have it available on our website, construct-success.com. And for any of the remodeling, construction questions, you can reach us at averyconstruction.com.
You beat me to it. I was going to ask where, if we can go to the business website. So thank you for that. And again, if you have any questions on this podcast or any other podcasts, or if you want any additional information, or if you have suggestions on what might make a good future podcast, please email me, Sean, at yesnerlaw.com. You can always visit the yesnerlaw.com website. We've got a ton of information on there as well. So thank you again, Jason, for being on the podcast.
Thanks for having me, Sean.
And we look forward to talking to you in another episode of the Yesner Law Podcast.
If you have questions that you think would make a great topic for a future episode, please email Sean or connect with us on social media. Sean Yesner and Yesner Law PL are Florida licensed attorneys. The information contained in this week's episode is not a substitute for legal advice. Your situation may differ, especially if you are located somewhere other than the state of Florida. If you have questions, please contact our office or contact a local attorney. Thank you for listening to this week's episode of the Crushing Debt Podcast.